Welcome to the All Things Endurance podcast. I'm your host, Rick Prince, and I'm excited to have on the podcast today Dr. Sam Scott. Sam has a PhD in exercise physiology. He's an advisor on exercise physiology to the American Diabetics Association. And what we're going to be speaking about today, in addition to just sort of general information about diabetics, he's also the CEO and co-founder of his business Enhanced, which we'll talk about, which is a really cool feature. It's an app and a platform that provides in-depth analytics for primarily type 1 diabetic. So, Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, obviously, I gave a little bit of a brief intro, but maybe if you could give a little bit about information about yourself, why you founded Enhanced, and kind of what your background is as far as research in the diabetic space.
Yeah, as you said, my name is Sam Scott. I'm an exercise physiologist. So my training was around glucose management, type 1 diabetes, and how we help people living with the condition to better understand different nutritional or behavioral factors that they can integrate as part of their training. And for the last couple of years, or the last at least sort of decade, I've been fascinated by how we can help people living with the condition, both to start and get into exercise, but also on the other end of the spectrum with professional level athletes across a range of different sports of how those individuals are able to compete at this level. And also, I think it's really interesting if you don't live with type 1 diabetes or you don't know too much about the condition. Firstly, so to kind of be more aware of it, but secondly, because of there are so many principles within training and sports nutrition which are completely sort of knocked out of sort of regular functioning when your
Mm.
body no longer produces insulin by itself, and just the appreciation that I think that places upon that hormone when you realize such an integral role it has for fueling, for managing sort of the homeostasis of energy provision during training, and then also recovery, etc.
Gotcha. And I should have mentioned in the beginning as well that in the past you've been an advisor to the professional cycling team, Novo Nordisk, which is made up completely of type 1 diabetics, which is pretty amazing to your point about sort of working with those elite athletes at that pointy end of the talent spectrum that have type 1 diabetics. That must have been a pretty amazing experience.
Yeah, so I spent 5 or 6 years working with Team Novo Nordisk. So this is a professional cycling team where all of the athletes live with type 1 diabetes. My motivation to be involved there was I really wanted to find out how they were doing what they were doing and how they were able to compete at such a high level and manage all of these factors related to, so say, the training, the travel, the competition. I've also worked with athletes on other sports as well. Most recently, we've been working with more kind of team sports players, such as rugby, for example. This comes with completely different elements related to nutrition, training, especially if you're part of a team where the rest of the athletes do not have to manage their glucose levels in the same way,
Mm.
because you've basically got to you've got to keep up with the scheduling of all of the athletes and all of the competition. There's nobody who's going to wait for you. So
Ah.
I'm really fascinated by this, and also yeah, I think it's really cool how we can sort of apply these principles a lot across different sports.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. It's a very cool topic area for sure. Um, so for our listeners, including myself, that aren't too familiar with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, maybe if you could provide a little bit of a background about maybe these two areas of diabetes, kind of what makes them different, or key definitions, and maybe some just, I guess, basic physiology about diabetes for us, like I said, including myself, that aren't that familiar with this area.
Yeah, sure. So diabetes is kind of an umbrella term, and encompasses different types of diabetes. And if we look at like these different subsets, the most common are type 1 diabetes, which affects around 9 million people
Oh,
globally.
wow.
And then you've got type 2 diabetes. This is by far the largest number. Currently, it's over 550 million people living
Wow.
with type 2
Okay.
diabetes, so extremely prevalent. You also have what's classified as pre-diabetes. This is the group that are at increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. This group represents another 500 million people, so
Yes.
about 500 million people in there. And then you've also got gestational diabetes, which is kind of included as a different type. This is something which is more short term that tends to affect women during pregnancy. But my main focus has been on type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes as well, and just sort of zooming into what those conditions actually mean if you're living with those conditions. So type 1 diabetes is a autoimmune condition. So for some reason that's unknown to us, whether it's related to some factors in the environment, some genetic related factors, your body's immune system just destroys the cells in your pancreas. They're called the beta cells. And these cells are responsible for producing insulin. So for some reason, very quickly, there's an immune response that just starts within the body. These cells are completely knocked out. And then for the rest of your life, you are needing to monitor your glucose on a daily basis. And then you're having to manage administering insulin yourself, either through injections or through an insulin pump. And then also doing things such as accounting for the impact of various behaviors on your blood glucose, such as nutritional factors or exercise, which is incredibly important. And then type 2 diabetes, this is the most common type. This is largely related to lifestyle factors, although there are some really strong genetic components involved as well, which will increase the tendency for some people to develop type 2 diabetes. But this is something that occurs as a result over a number of years, usually, whereby due to factors such as prolonged sedentary behavior, reduced physical activity levels, factors within the diet, such as high levels of carbohydrates, etc. Your body stops responding so much to the carbohydrates that you consume, or it starts responding in a more inappropriate way. In response, your body will have high blood sugar levels. In order to cope with this, your pancreas will start pumping out more insulin, the hormone which is there to lower these blood glucose levels. Eventually, your beta cells, the cells that produce insulin, get tired, so to speak. They just stop functioning so much, and then it moves into type 2 diabetes.
Mm.
And eventually, you then need to consider monitoring your glucose levels, administering insulin, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Well, no, that's a great, great summary. That was super helpful for me, and I'm sure the listeners as well. Um, so you had mentioned, some of the external factors, or I shouldn't say external, but just factors like exercising and nutrition and all that it has on diabetics. What are some of the biggest challenges that diabetics face while exercising that those that don't have diabetes do not really even have to really think about that much?
Mm. Yeah, so I would say that the main factors that really influence glucose levels are what you eat. So the carbohydrates that you eat, carbohydrates will cause your blood glucose to go up. Stress. So if you experience a very stressful event, you'll have a big release of adrenaline. This will basically cause your liver to dump out a load of glucose in response. And then exercise. And exercise is a really interesting one because there's not really a specific pattern that happens. It's dependent on so many different factors,
Mm.
such as the intensity of the exercise, the timing of which you've eaten or administered insulin in relation to that exercise session, environmental factors such as altitude, heat, excessive cold, and also competition related factors. So I mentioned about competition stress. If you combine a competitive event with exercise, this is also going to impact the glucose. So the main take home I would say is that it's a really complex situation, and it's something that's it's really not so easy to do. The other thing that I want to highlight, and this fascinates me as a exercise physiologist, is that how good of a job you take for granted that your body does
Mm.
before you're unable to produce insulin endogenously. So you may have come across this kind of measurement in that there's an estimated teaspoon of sugar, so 5 grams of sugar approximately, or glucose, which is circulating in the bloodstream of your average 70-kilo male. And you think about how much or how common it is that we consume meals that contain 10 times as much
Yeah.
glucose as this. And your body is amazing at keeping these glucose levels within this tight range. So it's all about sort of homeostasis of having this. And the reason that you want your body to have this sort of normal glucose level is that this glucose is really important for providing fuel to the brain. So if this 5 grams drops too low, so if it drops below sort of 4 grams, closing to 3.5, 3 grams, you really start experiencing symptoms of hypoglycemia in
Mm.
that your brain is just not receiving the energy that it needs. And this is why it's so critical. But on the other hand, you don't want your blood glucose levels to go too much higher than this 5 grams. We're able to cope with it to some degree. So normal physiology, we can probably go like twice as much as that, possibly 3 times as much as this. But over the long term, if you're exposing your body or you're like having too much glucose, this is associated with sort of longer term complications where the sugar is actually sort of toxic to smaller blood vessels within the fingers, within the kidneys, the eyes, and this is where
Mm.
these sort of complications develop. So that's why like keeping this tight glucose range is so critical. And then thinking back to the complexities of exercise, that's why it's such a sort of interesting topic.
Yeah, a lot of variables there. So I'm going to show my complete lack of knowledge and inexperience here with this next question. But so in your research, again, I know it obviously varies between person to person with genetics and a lot of other factors. Is there any research that shows then, say, for a type 1 or maybe even type 2 diabetic, what the optimal, if there is an optimal sort of exercise level or exercise duration, or is it just completely, individually specific?
This is kind of it's a good question. It's not the easiest question to answer because there's sort of nuances. Probably the most straightforward, easy answer is it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Basically, whatever you are interested in, whatever you enjoy, try and do that. However,
Yeah.
there will be limitations related to whatever your individual circumstances are. So, just some very broad speaking like examples. Um, some people living with type 2 diabetes, for example, might not have exercised for a number of years, or they might have some mobility issues if they're kind of carrying a little bit extra weight, or there might be other medications that sort of make exercise a bit more risky. There are different factors to consider there. Um, in regards to type 1 diabetes, there's a lot of information that I'm kind of putting on the table here, but type 1 diabetes, I've seen it where um, it's possible to compete in any sport that you can think of at the absolute highest level.
Mm.
So that demonstrates to me that with the right level of support, with the right level of dedication, and sort of knowledge and education, that this can be implemented. However, this is really, really difficult, and I appreciate that some people find it difficult to do any level of exercise, especially if they're newly diagnosed, because it's an incredibly complicated um, condition to sort of get on top of, to start managing. All of these factors that I've laid out now are not easy things to get your head around.
Sure.
And they are things which take people a lot of time to sort of figure out individually for themselves. So, yeah, in relation to actually pinning down an answer to the question, um, whatever you prefer is the optimal, but it will depend on your individual circumstances, and it will depend on what you are comfortable with and what you prefer and what your goals are, if
Okay.
that makes sense.
Gotcha. It totally does. Like I said, that shows my lack of knowledge in this space to
No,
probably even
it's
ask a question like that. But yeah, no, that completely makes sense. So in your time in this space, specifically, maybe even just researching all this, have you come across any sort of common misconceptions about diabetics? Maybe specifically with your work, type 1, but just anything that you feel like the average person might not understand or just completely gets wrong, whether it be oh, what you've just proven is debunked, of course, that you can't be an elite athlete if you have type 1 diabetes, type diabetes. Anything other things like that that you've come across that this sort of the public as a general probably gets wrong about diabetes.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of things. So the first thing maybe I should have mentioned at the beginning, I don't live with type 1 diabetes myself. And I've been working in this space a long time, and you do come across things like this. And I can understand that some of these misconceptions, etc., are probably much more amplified for those who live with the condition themselves. And I will probably miss some of the very common ones off here, but some things are that um, some people I've heard think that type 1 diabetes develops into type 2 diabetes.
Mm.
It's a kind of it probably makes logical sense the way that they're worded that way,
Yeah.
but they are completely different conditions. One is an autoimmune condition, the other is kind of this chronic condition, which is related to lifestyle and genetic factors. The other thing, I mean, specifically related to exercise, um, some people are told not to continue exercising or to stop exercising at the point of diagnosis. Many people um, say that they feel as though they never would be able to exercise again, but
Mm.
they've reincorporated it. Some people have experienced even where a clinician has said, stop exercising, or
Oh, wow.
exercising is too complex to integrate. Um, I mean, as I say, there's probably, if there's somebody listening to this who has type 1 diabetes themselves, they'll probably sort of be shouting like, there's this and this and this. Um, Yeah, I mean, there's different things. Like some people ask things like, is that the bad type or the good type?
Okay.
These are things which there's no bad type, there's no good type. It's the different classifications of them. It's yeah, very complex condition to live with. Um, but yeah, I don't know. And then on the other side, I mean, as I say, the ability to um, manage type 1 diabetes around any sport, as I say, is definitely possible. So I think that's a misconception that
Yeah.
is being a bit more debunked by the fact that we are starting to see more and more athletes at the top level, which is sort of showing that that's possible.
Yeah, that's great. And that's why I love, obviously myself as a cyclist, I've been familiar with Phil's team, Team Novo Nordisk. And I think that's what's so impressive, regardless of if they win the Tour de France, don't win the Tour de France, whatever. Just the simple fact that like you can have these athletes with type 1, diabetes competing at the highest level of the sport is really, it's really inspiring. And I'm sure for someone like yourself, it really proves that, again, while it takes a lot of management and a team around you to really get it right, that it's possible. It's really it's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, I think sport is a really powerful um, sort of tool that people use in society to demonstrate extremes of what's possible in
Mm,
human achievement. And I think that these achievements on the sporting level they give people that motivation that yes, this is possible for me to incorporate this. Maybe it's not my goal to reach the Tour de France, etc., but it is my goal to go to university, or it's my goal to achieve something professionally, or to set up a business, etc. And sport forms a really solid sort of platform to motivate for what's possible. I think that
yeah.
that's one of the things that captures a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that's something that I like.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So as you noted, you've clearly been in the space for quite some time. And so what was the genesis then for founding Enhanced, your business?
Well, I mean, this is over quite a few a few years, sort of um, the sort of idea and the recognition of different things. So I've been working in the diabetes space, but across different sort of platforms, if you like. So in professional sports, seeing what's available there. Also in clinical research, speaking to doctors, and then seeing what is coming in terms of the availability of technology to help people managing type 1 diabetes and blood glucose management. And what my team and I started to recognize is that um, the decision making that is required for people living with diabetes and all of those different factors related to exercise is a major pain point
Mm,
for somebody living with the condition. But these technologies, which are really rapidly entering across society into more and more people's lives, have the potential to just capture so much data. So continuous glucose monitors, which are able to 24 hours a day now show a window into what's happening with your glucose. But we also have different measuring tools such as sleep tracking wearables. We have exercise wearables, etc. And we kind of our idea was that if we could produce a platform that was able to integrate with all of these, kind of be an agnostic platform that was very lean, brought this information together and presented it to you in a more user-friendly fashion and took away some of the decision making from yourself related to
mm.
exercise, such as how should I train under this different situation? How should I aim to implement sort of I don't know, a nutrition strategy or a training strategy in relation to my glucose levels, then that would be incredibly impactful and would really help people living with diabetes and their doctors to just make better sense of the data, which is just being sort of becoming overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah. Do you find that then right now, sort of to your point, that a lot of the information is sort of siloed, a lot of things sort of work in isolation, and the goal of enhanced is to kind of bring it all together and make sense of these all these different data points?
Yeah, this is exactly it. So if you
Okay.
take taking continuous glucose monitors, for example. So continuous glucose monitors are amazing uh, sort of for people living with diabetes in that they take away the need to constantly have to do the finger prick test. So having to constantly sort of do a blood draw from your finger because they take that away, but they also allow you to analyze your own trends. You can start looking for patterns. You also have the gaps filled. You can see the trends, etc. But it's a lot of information, and a lot of people find it overwhelming from this
Mm,
data. Like if you
sure.
have to make all of these decisions day after day after day on how uh, a meal is impacting your glucose, etc., the data can become a lot. Also, a lot of people struggle with interpreting these traces, etc. And the platforms are very clinical looking as well. They're quite complex. So we wanted
Mm,
to simplify this, and then, as you say, the silos of being able to interpret my nutrition data or my exercise data with glucose was just lacking.
gotcha. So going off script, maybe perhaps a little bit, how do you see the role of AI then in this space? AI, I feel like is, in every space now, and it's growing, and it's everyone has their own opinion about it. But what do you see AI as a role in this space as far as specifically with the analytics and really helping diabetics kind of manage their situation?
Yeah, I see a huge application. There are different ones, but specifically focusing around exercise and what we are interested in. Um, AI is really good at coping with huge amounts of data. That's really
Okay.
its strength. And someone living with diabetes is generating a lot of data, having to interpret a lot of data. And the other thing is that we tend to, as human beings, miss different patterns or struggle to sort of interpret the true reason for the response that happens in blood glucose, just because we miss the amount of information that's there. So the power is to be able to simplify. It could be to provide the information in a different format. So some people like looking at graphs. Some people hate it. They just want to know the headline. They just want to know the simplified message from it. So these are a couple of things. In the sports space, we've already seen examples of this, such as AI generated training plans. These are very important and useful AI generated nutrition planning, etc., which can facilitate the work of a nutritionist. But for someone living with diabetes, you've got all of that information, which gets very overwhelming. So I
Yeah.
see AI as a way to just kind of help people digest.
Gotcha. Now that makes sense. Um, a lot of our listeners, most of our listeners perhaps, are coaches or aspiring coaches. So if a coach has an athlete, whether it's type 1 or type 2 diabetes, what advice would you give to that coach with respect to the athlete? We hear a lot about one of the things we're big proponents about is certainly staying in your lane professionally and with scope of practice. So I'm sure that there's a role in that. And the other thing we hear a lot, especially with elite athletes, is, it takes a village. Yes, it's that one person standing up there with the gold medal, but there's, 100 people behind them that have gotten them to that level. And I'm sure given the nuances and all the things involved with diabetes, I'm sure that's probably even more the case. So if you could kind of if there's any tips that you could give a coach who is maybe potentially onboarding an athlete or has athletes with diabetes type 1 or 2, what advice might you give them?
Mm. Um, so I think that this is probably um, like something that applies to most or almost all athletes, but it's really sort of appreciating them as an individual. And when it comes specifically, if they're living with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, the the expert on theirs will be the individual. They will
Mm,
know their diabetes more than anybody. They are the one who's having to manage it on a daily basis. So just communication, just asking about what they're comfortable receiving feedback on.
okay.
Sometimes they are not looking for that aspect of support. They're kind of, I'm okay with the diabetes management part of it. I just want somebody to assist solely on the training aspect,
Ah,
just
great point.
talking about those elements. So I think finding out where they are, finding out where they're also getting other support from, like do they have an endocrinologist or a diabetes educator that they're already working with, and how is that going? Um, what tools are they using to manage their diabetes? Like, are they using a continuous glucose monitor? Do they have access? Finding out how analytical they are as an individual. You probably come across athletes who are super analytical. They love the numbers.
Yeah.
Some, they just want to be told what to do. They just don't want to know that. So I think it's, yeah, appreciating that they are the expert. Also, just what they're comfortable with, and the relationship. I think if you're able to do that, oftentimes I think they'll be looking just for sort of the sounding board of, I'm trying this. They want to pull you into the conversation to sort of let you know what's going on. I think those are the main things.
Okay, perfect. Um, so what can non-diabetic athletes as well as non-diabetic coaches learn about nutrition and physiology from diabetic information and research? Because I'm assuming there is some type of correlation there that, that people outside the diabetes space can really learn, even if it's just to help them out, with the research out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what one I don't know how easy it is to really apply it into your training practically,
Yeah.
but I think one thing is just the appreciation of how amazing our bodies are coping with all kinds of stresses and just behaviors that we sort of implement on them. So appreciation of how the fact is like the balance of how our bodies are able to sort of self-regulate the fueling, self-regulate the uh, the way in which we recover, and how these different things that we implement are balanced in such a way to keep you safe ultimately. But then all of these tools, which are very, very standard in training and competition, would just be so complex if you no longer were able to produce insulin yourself. So,
Yeah.
like giving an example, there's a few, like is around um, like fueling during competition. So aiming for specific amount of carbs per hour, appreciating that we're unable to just take on pure glucose. And so, like all of these gels, all of these sports nutrition supplements, they will contain different combinations of these. A lot of athletes don't really understand what they do, but they realize
Mm,
that they are more effective, and sort of having an appreciation of why those um, why those products have been developed in the way that they are. It's because there's a physiological reason for how your body is able to take that on. And then also appreciating that those different types of carbohydrates if you didn't produce insulin. If you had type 1 diabetes, not only are just being absorbed differently in the body, but will have wildly different impacts on your glucose levels. So there's different things there. Another thing is from the experience of working with athletes such as cyclists is the planning and things that can take place. So uh, not living with diabetes, your real focus is just on strategy. It's what's happening in that moment. It's what's happening with different competitors. Perhaps you're thinking about weather conditions or something, but that's probably the most that's going to change within a given competition. But with type 1 diabetes, imagine having to also keep an additional eye on what your blood sugar is doing and keeping an eye on how you are matching fueling while combining that with blood glucose management to ensure that you are meeting carbohydrate requirements for the fuel, but not taking in the wrong type or too much carbohydrates so that your blood glucose goes too high during that event. It's
Wow.
a very complicated sort of thing that these athletes are managing that I think that if you don't live with type 1 diabetes, maybe you can just sort of think, I'm pretty lucky in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And I feel it's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? I mean, mostly a blessing, of course, but as far as how efficient the body is and how I think in your term amazing it is that it keeps us at this homeostasis. Because I think we just take for granted how amazing it truly is. I was talking to a coach a while back, well, an aspiring coach, I should say. Um, and they said that for whatever reason, I don't even know the reason why, but they were doing some research or just their own, research about diabetes. They had no idea what insulin was, what glucose was, and what their role was in the body. And then it helped them understand, just from a nutritional aspect, when they drink that big gulp from 7-Eleven, which contains, 10 million grams of, sugar,
Mm.
what's going on. So I feel like oddly, them just doing a little bit of research about diabetes really helped them. Oh my gosh, here's why our bodies are so amazing, or at least in that one aspect. I thought that was kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, I think that's why, I mean, I think this conversation is incredibly interesting. If you live with type 1 diabetes, you start to think about these concepts. But if you don't, like there's so many things, the more that you think about it, like different training principles that are, or sort of sports nutrition principles, which are very standard. And if you said to an athlete, you can no longer implement them, they would find it really, really challenging to then meet the level of all of the rest of the competitors that
Yeah,
were just taking these things for granted. So
sure.
things like how we might introduce carbohydrate loading and how that needs additional consideration around how you might adjust the carbs that you're taking in the lead up to competition, tapering that correctly, but also managing the insulin levels alongside. One of the big questions that I had a couple of years ago um, was that I was working with people who were very interested in sort of twice per day training, fasted training in
Okay.
athletes who do not have diabetes, because there's evidence that training twice per day or different modalities of carb restricted training, such as there's like sleep low, what's it called? Like train low,
S-
sleep low,
Yeah,
train low, but where basically you train in the evening, you do not refuel afterwards with carbohydrates so that you are in a state of low glycogen store level. And then the following morning you train. But thinking about this from the perspective of somebody living with type 1 diabetes, it's really, really difficult to imagine how you might train in the evening and then not refuel afterwards, and then the risk of hypoglycemia during the night is a major worry for many people living with type 1 diabetes,
Hmm.
and then thinking that you're going to train again in the morning. I mean, it's
Sure.
possible, but if you don't live with type 1 diabetes, you just take that stuff for
Of
granted.
course.
But it just becomes so complicated and all of these things. But on the flip side, the question got me thinking, okay, well, if you live with type 1 diabetes, how might you implement some of these strategies to your advantage? Because one of the other strategies is this like fasted training. So a lot of athletes, especially like cyclists, etc., in the off season, they will have a lot of fasted training sessions because they want to do these sort of fat burning, lower intensity training sessions where they're looking to sort of build up endurance or kind of do different things related to that. And if you live with type 1 diabetes, you might want to incorporate this because training in the fasted state would mean that you're not going to have consumed carbohydrates before, you're not going to have had insulin before. And so the risk of hypo is actually very low, and you're able to keep a very steady glucose level
Oh,
during
interesting.
that. So you could actually incorporate that type of training under the right level of um, sort of you'd have to be aware of what you're doing using a glucose monitor, etc. But having the idea of why this works and what happens in that situation is is really critical, I think.
Yeah, this is fascinating. This is fascinating information. Um, Last thing to chat about today, and you already sort of touched on this, but what are some of the biggest challenges that diabetic athletes face with respect to the collection and interpretation of sort of physiological biomarker data? You know, we sort of spoke about how a lot of this information is siloed and all that kind of stuff. Is there also, I mean, I guess, yeah, sort of just a general question, but also how much of you know, as far as an advocate role, um, do diabetics have to, okay, I got the CGM, I got the, you know, but what other stuff out there could help me? How much of that is, you know, also kind of on them to find the best products out there to interpret data or to collect data? That's also got to be pretty exhausting, right? Because not only are they dealing with the disease itself, but now they're also trying to deal with, okay, how do I best manage this and what are the best resources?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly complex and difficult condition to live with, and I only have the utmost respect for those who do. And my motivation to even work in this area is driven by the fact of sort of seeing how complicated it is and
Yeah.
so many of these open questions. Like all of these things that I've sort of raised, there's very little research in these areas, and these are mostly questions rather than answers that I'm able
Okay.
to provide. And the data is a big aspect. So, I mean, cycling is an example of a sport which is actually probably quite easy on this front because it's very data driven. It's nowadays possible to see your CGM in real time on your headset on your bike. You can make decisions. You're also able to have quite a bit of control over fueling. So you're able to carry food with you, etc. You're able to sort of do things like that. Um, so yeah, and it's also kind of more predictable in a way compared to other sports. But contrast this to something like rugby, as I say, like how do you monitor your glucose during a game? You cannot
Yeah.
do that. You cannot do it. It's a contact sport. It's very complicated. The only way really is to sort of intermittently have somebody perhaps check your glucose as soon as you go on the sidelines. It's also a sport where you have these huge impacts, these
Yeah.
huge adrenaline rushes. Um, you've got all kinds of factors going on that there's just not the headspace. You certainly can't carry food with you. Another sport which I think is I don't know what is the most difficult, but like tennis has to be up there
Hmm.
simply
Sure.
because how are you supposed to know how long a match is going to
Ah,
last?
yeah.
So at
Interesting.
least at least under some or most sports, there's a defined time
Yeah,
on it. But a tennis match could end in the next 10 minutes, or it could go where it's got an extra 2 hours to go, depending on
right.
how things develop. So I think it's incredible the fact that there are these athletes that are doing these different things, and there's so many elements connected with how you're able to make decisions, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fascinating. When you were saying earlier about that, if a coach is working with an athlete who has diabetes, they're going to be the expert. They're going to know everything. There was this really, I mean, sad but really interesting story about this one spinal surgeon, Dr. Farrar, and actually his son Tyler was an elite, participated at the world tour level of cycling, raced the Tour de France. Dr. Farrar was on his way to his office. To do a surgery and was hit by a car and had it was basically life-threatening injuries, and he was then paralyzed from the neck down. But he made this statement, and he had been a spinal surgeon his entire life, very senior, and he said he was embarrassed from the patient end now how little he knew about the disease or about the injury. And I thought that was so fascinating because obviously went to med school. He's, this is his job. And but being, he said it was completely different being on the patient side versus the clinician side. And he literally used the word embarrassed by how little he didn't know. So I think, yeah, it's got to be just incredible how much information that these people that have diabetes or are living with diabetes that know about the disease and are able to practice. I just thought that statement was so interesting.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to type 1 diabetes, I I work a lot with people with living with type 1. I have a lot of friends. Um, I've really tried to sort of put my self. It's very, very difficult to really imagine how difficult that would be because you
Sure.
just do not get a single day off. Like
Yeah.
even if you're ill, if you're ill, the management of your type 1 diabetes is actually going to be even harder than normal. If you're on holiday, you can't take a rest from that. If you're under stress or under pressure, or if you're in a rush, it's only going to make things more complicated because you're going to have all kinds of different sort of hormonal changes that just adds to the complexity of managing your glucose. So I think that's it. But on the other side, this is why with type 1 diabetes, there's so many of these communities and things which form. I remember during my PhD, one of the first things that came up when I started speaking to people to recruit potential participants in the study was that they didn't know anybody else living with type 1 diabetes. Would we be able to start introducing each other who were taking
Oh,
part in the
interesting.
studies because they were so keen to find others whereby they no longer sort of felt alone. And we actually developed community groups. That group is still going. That was like 10 years ago that we
Oh,
did
wow.
that. And it used to meet very regularly all the time. And speaking to people living with type 1 diabetes, you find that it's like even like their partners, even their parents, even other people in their family, they they sympathize in the sense of how challenging it can be, but they don't really understand what
Yeah.
it's like other than those who are actually living with the condition. So this is why, like with the work that I'm doing, I always try and get the feedback from people who actually live with the condition, try and actually see how it works. And working with the athletes, which we did in the past, we didn't do anything until we spent a very long time asking people what they were doing. What's your opinion on technology? What's your opinion on this sort of thing? Because it was just so important to just find out why why those different elements are, rather than just saying, well, a book says that you should do
Yeah.
this, therefore I'm going to start demanding that you implement this in your training. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible work that you're doing in such a fascinating space. Um, so for all of our listeners, there are a lot of resources that Sam has. He has a book called Empowered: The Science of Exercise with Type 1 Diabetes. The link to the free ebook version, as well as the Amazon link, Spotify, that will be on the outro to this video podcast. Will also be on the podcast page on our website. If any of our listeners are interested in a discount on any USCA certification, you can use the code ATE for $75 off. So, Sam, thank you so much for your time on this. This was a really enlightening and fascinating discussion. And again, like I said, I think it's an incredible work that you're doing. So, thank you so much for that.
No, thanks so much for having me.
Sounds good. All right. I'll talk to you soon.